How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boileye Hobby Time. Today I'm making a survival shelter from one of these. It's a prairie schooner with legs, also known as a mule in the wild imaginary West. I thought about repurposing this one specifically for today's build, but I like it and I want to still be able to use it for my tabletop sessions, so I'm just going to build a brand new one from scratch. I'd like this diorama to be able to double as a terrain piece for games, so I did opt to make the base from something that could taper down to the play surface. And surprise, surprise, I chose XPS foam. To ensure that the scale was accurate, I used the other mule as a guide. After tracing out a line, I sliced away with my utility knife and snapped off the edges till I had something I was happy with. Next, it was time for some lumber. I grabbed a mix of bass and balsa wood strips and I got to work building the bed of the wagon. This build was prompted by what my patrons voted on for our monthly art challenge, which was repurposed vehicles, and having a doubly repurposed vehicle felt appropriate. At some point in the past, I was given a suggestion to add an airplane crashed in the Wild West that had been turned into a survival shelter or a fort of sorts by Gabe and his family from Australia. Now, I don't have airplanes in the wild imaginary West, at least at this point, so I decided to take that suggestion and apply it to the mech. So thank you, Gabe, for that. And to everybody who's suggested things in the past that I have failed to remember or mention, I do apologize. I get a lot of suggestions across a lot of different platforms, and I lose track of them. So if that applies to you, please don't take it personally. It's not you, it is me. After the main three walls of the bed were together, I detailed and added trim pieces to the exterior to make it a little bit more eye-catching, and then it was time to move on to the bows. And for that, I used some armature wire, which I bent and copied a few times. The nice thing about armature wire is that it's fairly easy to bend, so I didn't have to have them exactly perfect before they were put in place. I could do a lot of the bending after the fact. Once the bows had been spaced out and glued in place, it was time to begin the process of wild imaginary Westification. For the undercarriage machinery, I used half of an engine block from an 18-wheeler model kit, and I broke out my bits boxes and began going crazy with the kitbashing. If you've ever watched me make another mule or any other mechs in the wild imaginary West, you'll probably notice that almost none of them are made in the same way. Most of them have generally the same shape and idea, but no two mechs are exactly the same. While practically speaking, that's probably mostly because I don't have a lot of the same pieces to draw from in my bits box. From a lore perspective, it's because the wild imaginary West itself is kitbashed. Everything in the West is essentially scrapped together from what is brought out from the East, or based on things that they find. So repurposing anything that they have on hand, they modify their equipment to serve their purposes, whether that be mining, trapping, outlawing, cowboying, or monster hunting. The nice thing about this mech is that because it's on its side, I really only needed to detail the side that would be face up. Everything else will be under the snow. I also only had to work on 2 legs, which was nice. As I get further into the build, I'll tell you a bit more about why and how it got into this situation. Once the mule was mostly done, I glued the legs into a permanent position, and then I built up the area around the mech with extra offcuts of foam. This is to add volume, which will become piles of snow at a later step. Once the foam had been added and I was sure of the way that the mech was going to be lying on the ground, I added some extra planks of wood for kind of like a little makeshift flooring for our survivalist, and then I glued that across the bows. Based on the views that I see on those survival shelter videos, I am imagining that a lot of you guys also watch some of those same videos I do. I'm always inspired to go out and make a survival shelter, and I guess this is my way of living vicariously through dioramas. On the right side of the campsite, I added some posts in the ground, which I will stretch the bonnet to in just a minute. But first, it was time to build up the snow. I broke out an older hobby mat and some Sculptamold, which I added water to and mixed in a chipotle catering box. Once that was mixed up thoroughly, I patched it up and filled out all of the transitions in the foam to create my little snowy landscape. While that was still wet, I placed the mech into its position and proceeded to blend it into the terrain. And then I left that to dry. Once dry, I came back to it, and the next step was to add the fabric. This is some painting drop cloth with a plastic liner on one side, which I have found very helpful for not getting super glue on my fingers. It can also be cut very easily without fraying like crazy. I cut that down to size, then marked out the significant points with a Sharpie and refined the edges to get a nice stretched bonnet look. Once that had been glued in place, I wrapped all the posts with some little scale rope. And then to make sure that this thing doesn't blow away in heavy winds, I ran the rope back and forth across the top, tying it at each of the posts and back to the wagon itself. For some additional storytelling, I decided to make this little shelter appear to be more comfortable than many survival shelters go. It's not a dramatically desperate situation. And to communicate that, I wanted to have plenty of chopped firewood for a wood-burning stove. Along with the cut wood, I also added some drying logs and a little stump, which I made a scratch-build axe for. All of this actually serves to answer a question that will undoubtedly appear in the comments, and that is because the figure that I have for this build is not wearing a jacket and would likely be freezing, except if he keeps himself busy chopping firewood to the point where he works up a sweat, then it makes sense. He has a sufficient heat source and isn't really in much danger of freezing at this point. With that, the survival shelter was done, and it was time to start painting. I started by priming everything black with an acrylic primer from the airbrush, including the figure, who is an official mechanic character mini from the Wild Imaginary West RPG. Now that we're safely in the painting phase of the build, I'll probably do mostly talking about lore from here on out, and then break randomly into talking about what's happening on screen as well. Barnabas was grateful that he had survived the avalanche, but he couldn't help feel that creeping sense of survivor's guilt. Chopping wood, even though he had more than enough, and tinkering with his glove, which definitely didn't need it, helped keep his mind off things. If he survives the winter, returning east is likely the safer option. But completing the journey to Bonneville Harbor feels like the best way to honor the crew that he started this journey with. He'll work on making it through each day for now, and make a decision when that time comes. The rations will last much longer now with just one mouth to feed. After the base colors had been established with the airbrush, I broke out a wet palette and started building up the midtones and highlights. Probably not necessary to take as much time painting this as I did, because I'm going to give it a frosty dry brush as soon as I'm done, but it was good practice, I guess. If Barney's friends were still around, they'd be surprised and proud of his resourcefulness. He's really set up a nice little camp for himself. They always teased him and joked that he'd be the first to go in a scary campfire story. But just look at him now. The avalanche that wrecked the mech and swept away his friends wasn't an accidental occurrence. It was definitely caused by something trying to wipe them out. They didn't see what it was, but they heard and felt the distant thump up on the mountainside, and moments later the thunderous approach of the avalanche. Animals up here in the high passes of the Rockies are known to do that. It was most likely a bighorn or an alpine shepherd. Either way, when he woke up, his friends were gone, and the mule was a wreck. After the mech had been painted, I dry brushed white over everything to add a little icy appearance. Then I cleaned up the overspray. I threw on some Mod Podge, and while that was still wet, I gave it a dusting of snow effects from Woodland Scenics, which I sealed with the spritzing of isopropyl alcohol and watered down white glue. Then it was time to move over to painting the figure. As good of a mechanic as he was, there was no way for him to get the machine back up and walking by himself. Luckily, the power supply was mostly undamaged, and he was able to reroute all the extra power from the engine to the forestall, which had not been crushed because the mule had not rolled over. If that had happened, there was no chance that he would survive. In spite of the isolation and loneliness that he's currently feeling, he also recognizes that there is a blessing to it. He has a heat source, the avalanche felled plenty of trees that he can use for firewood, and he has food and water. He's heard of far worse things happening to groups of people who've tried to cross the mountains in wintertime. Being a little lonely is not all that bad in the grand scheme of things. As you can see, I did not establish the base colors on the figure using the airbrush, aside from the black primer, that is. I chose to paint everything with the brush, just taking my time enjoying the process. Like I said before, this is an official miniature from the Wild Imaginary West RPG. It was sculpted by Kelway Costa based off of the concept art by Hardy Fowler. And a couple weeks ago, I got some paper samples sent to me for review from the game. We are closing in on those things being shipped out, and I'm so excited. If you want more updates on that, you should go to runefoundry.com. I'll drop a link for that below. From what he can tell, the rerouted power to the forestall should sustain a sweeping protection for at least another month, and likely further. Now, if something large and aggressive approaches the shelter and requires a specific burst, well, that's another story. He's just praying that that isn't the case. But who knows? It could also be the case that his luck changes for the better. Maybe there's another group of well-equipped travelers headed to Bonneville Harbor along the same route this time of year, as foolish as that is. Maybe they discover the wreckage and offer to take him the rest of the way. Anything's possible. I'm not really sure what's going to happen to our friend Barney here, but maybe we'll discover the rest of his story someday. With the glue on the base dry and our character painted, it was time to put the two of them together and wrap up this diorama. After the character had been glued down, I mixed up some snow paste using that Woodland Scenics snow effects and some Mod Podge. I used that to patch up the areas around the barrel and the crate, and after that, I called it good. Before moving on to my final shots, please take a moment to appreciate all of the wonderful repurposed vehicles that were sent in by my patrons. Great job, patrons. You guys crushed it. Thanks again to everyone who participated. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out, as always, to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.